Hello and welcome to a special edition of Nerds United E6 Tournament Roster Building 101. I called it a redux. Um, Joined always with, well, not always, but with Aster.
Hello, everybody.
And we have a special guest.
It's been a while when you're a special guest.
Yeah. We have not so, well, okay, maybe like a special. Well, I don't. You're just special. You're special. You're special to all of us.
I love it. Yeah, no, it's been, gosh, I don't know, like year and a half. Man, it's been a long time since I've been able to hop on. So excited to be with you guys tonight.
Just messing with levels now. I think I have to put myself down a little bit. Let's drop.
Wow, I don't think we've ever had Exto's volume too loud.
Yeah.
Look at who's streaming X-Raid all of a sudden. I think I see I go into the red when I get excited, but I see Aster and Durden. They're in the yellow. I think we're all good.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was you, Aster. I think, well, no, I think this was your idea originally. And then Durden was like, you know what? I'd really like to stream again. And then we decided to bring the band back together. So yeah. Do you want me to go to the next slide, or do you want to just kind of talk holistically about tournament roster building?
Yeah. Let me just give a very short kind of intro to this. So what we're trying to accomplish tonight is just to set up a framework of if you've played Perfect Team for a little bit and you want to get into kind of being more serious about playing tournaments, or you play tournaments but you want to kind of advance your skill level of tournaments and your participation in them. We're just going to kind of go through step by step of how do you get started with tournaments, how do you kind of approach building a roster from scratch, and how do you get better at tournaments over time. So kind of how to get the reps in to get good at playing tournaments, because it really is something. It's very different from league, and then tournaments is a pretty broad category. There's a lot of different types of tournaments, and there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and it's very daunting, as starting out, to see so many different options and not really sure where to start and how to get better. So I think I think that's kind of just the goal for tonight. And then the other thing is we're kind of going to touch on a lot of topics, and hopefully you guys that are listening and kind of here with us, let us know what you want us to go deeper into, because a lot of these topics we could talk about for 10 minutes or we could talk about for 2 hours. And we're going to talk about a number of topics, maybe for a few minutes each, but we're happy to do, other streams, with hopefully all three of us, but if not, some combination of the three of us, and to dig deeper into these different formats. So that's kind of the plan for tonight. We're just gonna kind of go step by step, and then we'd be happy to kind of go deeper into some of these issues and topics if people want to.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add, Esther, is that the whole like Nerds United it was first conceptualized because it's funny Capcom said filling cap tournaments, because that's actually how our streaming got started. Is because we were trying to do some streams to make some of the aspects of PT more accessible. Because as we all know, it's hilarious. The open main event on Sunday night will fill up a day ahead of time, and half the rosters don't even have a prayer of making it, more than 2 rounds. Just being realistic, but Meanwhile, a bronze cap that's highly accessible to most players will fill up last minute if we're lucky, just because it's a cap. And so one of the purposes of our actually, so we first started streaming just to try and help people understand how to build caps and make that format accessible. And so I know Exto and Aster the same, and many of the people in chat, you'll often get DMs from new people, and they're asking, how do you win a tournament or how do you build a roster? And so that's why we wanted to bring it back to just 101 level, is to just try and make roster building accessible to people. Because a lot of the new players, they'll see discussions in the main Discord server, PT server, around modeling and some of the advanced statistics people throw around, and it makes PT feel inaccessible to people. And so I'm sure that's been the global effort while I haven't been around as well with Exo and Aster, but we're just trying to make it accessible for people. So like Aster said, if anyone has any questions or requests for us to deep dive a topic, just let us know.
Okay. So yeah, guys kind of touched a bit on this, but
Yeah, so I think just as kind of if you're thinking about, playing tournaments, or you play tournaments, but you feel like you're not getting great results, it's something you have to devote a serious amount of time to. There's a lot of different ways to use that time, but you're going to have to kind of invest time and effort. There's not really a good passive way to succeed at tournaments. You really do have to grind and spend a lot of time. There's ways that you can kind of maximize the use of your time, and we're going to get into that a lot. But the bottom line is, if you really want to get better at tournaments, there are steps that you have to take to spend time on it. So we're going to kind of go through the different steps that you can follow, and maybe talk a little bit about how how much effort it takes, for each of these. But we'll go one step at a time with that. So why don't we jump right into the next slide, Exto, and kind of start that process. So just as a general level, there's a lot of tournament formats. Pretty much everybody has the same cards, but there are certainly, some of the higher level formats open where simply owning the best cards is going to give you a significant advantage. Now, it's not going to make you, there's no format where it's like, oh, I have the best cards, I'm, a prohibitive favorite to win this tournament. There's always going to be a pretty decent, group of players that have the best cards or close to the best cards. And, you can get up to the level with them, but it's rare to have a format where you have like a significant advantage from your cards over everybody. But obviously, if there is that advantage, you want to get to the point where nobody has an advantage over you. And so that's going to be kind of step one. If you're playing a format, really, if you're playing every format, you want to have the best cards. Now, starting out, you're not going to know what those cards are necessarily, and we're going to get into how you figure out what the best cards are. But that's kind of the step one of tournaments, is you're going to need good cards to use for that format.
I'm going to take a risk here. Exo, do you remember the article you posted? It was a link around trying to determine the odds of a baseball team winning a series based on overall records. I cannot for the life of me remember.
Yeah. Like whatever, a 600% team versus a 400% team in a best of 7, like what's the probability that they win the series type of thing?
Yeah, so it was an interesting discussion we had, the three of us around. I had a bunch of gold data from Jalad, and I just want to reiterate this point Aster brought up about best cards. And so I believe my team had like a 62% win rate for July. I just took the month off and was playing a lot of gold format. And I took my win rate and down to like the 10,000th decimal. And I took a team that was like around like 44% or something. And I ran it. And I want to say the odds of me defeating that team, which was like the in the whole sample size of data, like the 60 something ranked team, was somewhere around like, I think it came out to 65%. I'd have to pull it up. And so I just want to reiterate that for Aster, because I know in a lot of times when if anyone's coming from other card games, having the best cards in the most well constructed deck can feel oppressive whenever you're playing. But in baseball, it doesn't work out that way. And so we can't just have number one, own the best cards, and that's it. But I know, especially those who are new to the game, they'll, it's easy to think that way. I'm just going to get the best cards and start winning tournaments. And it just doesn't work out that way.
Well, and also I think there's the flip side is that I think there's a lot of even very experienced players that kind of often post by like, I'm not going to play that tournament because I don't have the very best cards. I have no chance. And obviously you have a lesser chance, and you may even have a lesser chance to the point where it's probably not the best use of limited resources to enter that tournament. But, it's important to remember that, the way baseball is structured and the way specifically Perfect Team is structured, being behind in cards, first of all, is a disadvantage that you can sometimes make up based on your roster construction, but it's very rare that you have no chance. And obviously, if you're playing 128, 256 team tournament, it's rare that a really bad team will make it all the way to the very end. But I've seen kind of mid-level teams often make deep runs and win 100 weekly or even 256 team tournaments. And so, and that's not to say that that's like their optimal format that they should be playing, but don't skip a tournament that you like just because you think you have no chance at it. One is, I think the more you play certain formats, the better you're going to get. And I think there's there's strong value in sometimes playing tournaments that are not not the most EV, just to like get better at learning how to play.
Yeah.
And the best example of that is, I do think with Quicks being only 5 packs this year for 32 team Quicks, it's not the best EV to be just playing those, but it provides an opportunity to, first of all, focus on just one format. You can just, every time you're out, you can join another one, and you're playing iron or bronze or silver or gold, they're going to be firing constantly, and you just get enough reps at that particular format that I think you can get better at playing tournaments much more quickly by doing something like that than bouncing around to various daily formats and trying to find the formats where it's the cheapest card pool, or that that you have the best expected win rate. So it allows you, if you focus on one format and can play it constantly, it really helps in your roster building, because you see flaws so much better when you build a roster and then you play it in 10 tournaments, and then you look at the results and you're like, oh, this guy always, like, I'm always running into fatigue problems. I clearly have my bullpen set up poorly. It just shows you errors so much better, where if you're bouncing around from tournament format to tournament format, you don't always realize where you're making mistakes.
No, totally agree. And the last thing I'll toss in to that discussion, Aster, and this could even be a stream itself, is I know in the past we talked a lot about have a win condition for your team, like have a direction that your roster build's actually going. And so I know there's times when I know I don't have a lot of the elite cards for a format. I'll just sell out to a win condition, such as I'll just go in all in on defense. I won't punt bats completely, but my roster will have a heavy, heavy defensive focus. Just hoping that I can eke out a best of seven win against a superior team in terms of cards that has card advantage. And so, which that could be a whole stream in and of itself, is some of those different win conditions you can build around if you don't have access to all the best cards in a format.
Yeah, and going back, like Aster saying, play 10 tournaments. I think especially with some of the as you go lower down, it's a lot harder to assess what the good cards are. So like, meaning it may not be 10 tournaments, maybe 20, but maybe 30. But the idea is that as you continue to kind of like work on a format, you gain that familiarity and you figure out like what's actually um like which cards are actually good. And then I think that's where you can kind of start uh you know focusing on like which cards to play, roster construction, and start doing kind of the secondary things to help you win.
Yeah.
So, just kind of jumping around a little bit. The number two, knowing which card to play, in terms of like shapes and things like that. I think let's actually table that and we'll discuss that at the next part. But and also proper roster construction. I think we're going to deal with that a little bit later if we get to it. But I just wanted to kind of number four, forcing good matchups. One of the things that I think a lot of people I see, tournament rosters for newer players don't seem to take a lot of time to thinking about matchups. And at the end of the day, for a lot, especially for tournaments where everybody pretty much has the same cards, live tournaments, bronze and iron, things like that. Getting the matchups on your side is such a big factor. I see teams where it's an open format, and against a right-handed pitcher, their lineup only has one, maybe two left-handed bats. Now there are some formats where there just aren't those, there aren't good bats on both sides, but a well-constructed roster should, have, proper matchups. That's why you have, let's say you're going 14 hitters, you have room to have, a number of platoons and, to take advantage of that, or you have some switch hitters that can match up either way. But that's just such a big part of getting better at tournaments, is recognizing that I've got to use those matchups to my advantage. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that, but I'm always surprised by how often that's a factor where I'm like, I wonder why this person doesn't get doesn't get why they're not doing well. And I'm looking at it like, oh, you're just making it easy for the good teams that you're not even trying to set up good matchups. You're just allowing them to take advantage if if you don't have opposite side hitters, or if you have the wrong pitchers for what the player pool looks like.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, Aster, and I did this in PT 23. I don't think I've tinkered with in PT 24, but especially when we were having fun with the King of Gold format, and there was some hype around that, and all the PTs blend. God, it could have been PT 22, but I remember there was a heavy trend towards those right-handed batting. I can't remember exactly, but I actually went all in all 12 of my pitchers were same side pitchers. Just the theory being that I would take advantage of those matchups because of the meta hitting, and that I would force the fatigue situation for teams that weren't managing that well, that didn't have those settings. in place to prevent, severe fatigue. And I can't remember, I think I got first or second in King Gold that week. But forcing good matchups and putting some thought into that is incredibly underrated.
Right. Well, and so Ludwig asked an interesting question, which I think may actually be a first, but let's go ahead and celebrate it. I actually, in formats where like everybody is going all righty starters, I really will lean heavily into those matchups. I'll try and see if I can find a way to have 9 lefties, with switch hitters mixed in certain positions, because I know that I'm just not going to face too many contrarian pitching lineups that have all lefties. Like you can really go all in and go harder on the matchups in that situation, because you just know that the vast majority of the teams you face are going to have 5 righties, and you just you lean hard that way, and then you maybe will lose a round if you happen to run into a team that decides to go contrarian and starts all lefties. But obviously you can counter it a little bit by having platoons, and so you do have some other guys the other way, and you're only a little bit weaker that way. But I find that it works best.
So he brings up a good one. So I'd have to look at my old data set, but my July Gold data set, I want to say left-handed pitching was around 86%.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's the most extreme meta I've ever seen in PT for a tier-based format. I mean,
that was right-handed pitchers or left?
Sorry, it was left-handed pitchers.
It was like Vita Blue and all them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a fascinating conversation, because we were so early in the meta, or so early in the cycle, that we didn't have any really good right-handed bats. So we just had like good left-handed bats and 86% left-handed pitching. And it was a gnarly meta to tinker around with, and trying to find some of those potential hidden gem bats, and revisiting some of the earlier meta players like Wally Berger and such, playing him in left field. But yeah, it was a crazy meta.
So yeah. Well, and also, the early part of the year, the fact that build a lineup was all switch hitters just created an odd situation, because in a lot of years it's really hard to find quality switch hitters to play, but those cards were very good for a lot of levels, and there were so many of them that you could have a lineup where you had enough switch hitters that you were rarely going to find yourself in a situation where you were way too far on one side, even if you were really trying to stack against a particular pitcher meta. And so this has been a different year than a lot of years, because the just amount of switch hitters. Then I feel like even as the build a lineup players have stopped being part of the meta, there just are so many switch hitters this year that are playable.
A lot of the future legends, Aster, Jason Dominguez is still hanging around in gold.
So I built a lineup for something recently, and I think I had I think it was a gold format, and I think I had 6 or 7 switch hitters. Because Nasim Nunez is a switch hitter, and Dominguez, and isn't the new Grandal card a switch hitter?
I think so. I was just thinking about that card too. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and so I ended up building a roster, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't intend to do it, but it was a cap roster, and so I didn't really have any platoon set up, and I was like, oh wow, I actually have 6 or 7 switch hitters in the lineup, and I was just very surprised. I was like, wow, that gives a lot of flexibility, and
In a hypothetical situation where, say, it's all left, or it's whatever, 70% left-handed starting pitchers, do you think it makes sense to forego platoons in favor of your backups being almost as good as your starters?
Um,
To be like, so like if like I play whatever 9 right-handed bats, and for my 4 bench bats, like say 3 of them are right-handed and 1 of them is left-handed, and so like maybe platoon one spot, but make sure that like if I'm gonna have to bench some of my guys due to fatigue, is it better to have like get that platoon advantage?
um, I think I think I would still lean at like a 70-30 split. I think I would still lean towards, having, my VL lineup being, 9 right-handed batters, maybe, 1 or 2 be switch hitters. But then I think I'm still going to want to have most of my um, uh, backup bats be platoon, setups. That sometimes can be harder, with when it's when the strong side is, righties, and then you're trying to find lefties that can like play multiple positions and play some of those positions where lefties don't generally play. Um, that that I sometimes can find harder just as from like a roster construction perspective. So then you just kind of have to focus on getting, getting coverage to have, backups at every position, um, and kind of have to, give up on platoons just because of the card pool not really giving you the options. And that might be where switch hitters kind of come into play and might have more value.
Yeah.
Uh,
I actually agree with you, Aster, in that even when we saw probably the most extreme pitching meta ever in gold with gold earlier this cycle, I mean of all time, 86% is gnarly. And so but thinking even about that meta or even some other metas, I think that I don't know, I think it really depends if there is a meta rotation, which in this case there actually was a meta rotation. It was like Herb Score and Vita Blue and Randy Jones and all of these left-handed starters that you just saw over and over and over again, like the same rotation, with occasionally someone slotting out someone else for that SP5 slot. And so in that case, and like that extreme, like when there's an actual meta rotation, I think you can consider something like that. But by and large though, in most metas, even when there's like a 70-30 split, or a lot of times there'll be like a 65-35 or 60-40 split, even when there's 3 or 4 same-sided dominant starters, there's gonna be that occasional SP4, SP5 that's the opposite hand, which actually offers if you're going with classic platoon, a kind of a normally scheduled rest day for your starters. And so if there isn't that meta rotation that you just see everywhere in all the top competitive teams, because that's who you're trying to build to defeat anyway, then like I'd still consider a classic platoon.
Yeah, it makes sense.
right. So that was a really good conversation about matchups. So moving on to number 5, sliders. Obviously, sliders we can talk forever about them. Um, uh, if you guys dig into the archives, Exto did a solo stream where he broke down some of the some of the research he done on the efficacy of various sliders. I recommend that if you want to dig into that. The kind of general concept that I'll just say about sliders is in a in a large number of cases, the sliders don't actually do that much. Um, they I think people sometimes think they have such control over their roster, and because they can't see their opponent's sliders, they assume that I'm losing because the other person has better sliders. The sliders are, for the most part, the illusion of control. You don't actually change the way the AI manages your team very much based on sliders, and so don't overdo it. Like, I do think you can, here and there, kind of put your team in better situations based on how you manage your sliders, but don't overthink them. If people want to, we can maybe dig into and do a stream where we talk more about the sliders that do have an impact and kind of how to use them and how to make adjustments for various tournament types. But as Kidney's pointed out, you often, if you're tinkering with sliders too much, you're probably actually making it worse rather than better. So, I think I set my sliders a year and a half ago, and I don't think I've made really any changes except for there's one or two sliders that I'll adjust based on the tournament era, and that's really it. And there's some situational things that I'll change, but very minimal. I don't really think you need to go that deep into it. And so, I put it on there as something you can do to differentiate, but it's actually very limited. And quite honestly, number 6 is far more effective sliders.
Yeah. I think Ricky Henderson, Immortal Ricky Henderson, has proven that to everyone, because I'm pretty sure we all have stealing off, and the dude is still swiping 50 to 100 bases a season.
And just to let everybody know, hiring a witch doctor on or an Etsy shaman can get expensive. However, if you go on Etsy, you can take a course to become your own Etsy shaman, and that's much more economical. I highly recommend it. I would say 92% of my success in Perfect Team is because I spent the money to become a certified shaman.
I linked the 2 videos. One was on Durden's channel, and then one is on my channel on YouTube. They're in the chat.
Excellent.
Next slide.
Next slide. Sounds good.
Big preface here before Aster dives in. We are talking about modern era. So just think, I know a lot of people call it flat, right? We're talking modern era and default everything. And so when we're talking about what my roster should look like, now when we start going back in time and getting into some of the other historical eras, you'll see a difference. There will be a correlating, or I should say a corresponding increase in batters, because you'll need fewer pitchers. And so when this slide, we're really referencing the modern era. So
yeah, so we're thinking primarily in terms of what we're talking about today, an open format, whether that's open bronze, open gold, just like the open main event. This is what you are kind of using as a default thing. And that's why I really lean towards, if you're starting out with tournaments, to play the quicks and play one of the open formats, because, building this kind of a roster is going to help as you kind of branch out into some of the more era-based tournaments or some of the cap tournaments. You kind of learn how to adjust from this as a base. So I generally default to 14 batters. I know there are people out there that in open formats will go to 15 or 16, or even sometimes to 13 batters, depending on the format. There have been situations in the past where the open run environment has been very weird, but generally speaking, this year especially, I think I've pretty much always used 14, unless it's an era tournament or something like that. If it's a format where you're going to be using 2A players, guys that can pitch and hit, you can sometimes have a little bit more flexibility, but it's rare that somebody, we just don't have that many players that are viable, pitchers and hitters for an open format. That just, they're rarely is the case. Usually, most two-way players have much more value in cap. The nice thing about 14 hitters is it allows you to platoon 5 positions, and then you'll of course have 4 hitters that play both versus lefties and versus righties. And again, the Y platoon is what we've talked about before. It's getting the good matchups. Is that if you don't know at the start of a tournament, you may, if it's the weird format where it's 86% lefties, then you know who you're facing. But most tournaments, you're not going to be sure, who your opponent is going to have. So you're putting together a roster that can match up against whatever handedness of the pitcher that you end up facing. And so that's the real advantage is, by setting up platoons, you can make, adjustments, automatically to have a good matchups against whatever hitters you face. Whatever pitchers you face.
Yeah. I know it's number 5, like, gosh, we could have a whole stream just about like setting up your depth chart. And so, one of the things I'll often see is, someone will take a super utility card, and they'll have them back in like the primary backup for like 6 or 7 positions. And so, when we don't have time here, but when you start getting into the math of fatigue, the frequency of fatigue, it just doesn't work. And you're going to end up with exhausted players in, 3 or 4 games, which can, ultimately cost you a series. And so when we're talking about, the default is 14 batters, platoon 5 positions, 4 hitters play both ways. Like, I don't know if I can't speak to PT24. I can only speak to past cycles. I haven't done the math this year, but I would never have a player as their primary backup for more than 2 positions. So
yeah, I mean, Exo and I did a stream a couple weeks ago where we Exo had a chart of like how fatigue compounds from game to game, and if you look at it, if you have one player as the backup at, let's say, left field, center field, and right field, and you set your fatigue settings at, like, let's say 96%, which is a number I think a lot of people use. All 3 of your starters will play games 1 through 4, and then game 5, one of those guys will be below 96% and will get replaced by the backup. And then game 6, one of the other 2 guys, who's ever more fatigued, will get rested. But that means that the last guy is now going to be at like 40% or less for game 7. Oh, excellent. We have the chart up there. And so, it can be really bad if you're, if they just, if they don't get that rest, because
it's also, I've heard rumblings that like the player card age matters. I don't know if that's real or not,
but those murmurs have been around since PT21. I don't know if they're true or not, but they've been around a long time.
But yeah, I think this was just data I pulled. I forget. It was like a bronze tournament, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think in general, it just kind of captures,
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where, it's not the worst idea in the world to, enter a tournament and, deliberately set your fatigue settings wrong and see what happens. See how bad it gets, and that can be a good way of kind of getting a sense of it. So I think the players that had the incorrect ages where they were in their 50s, I've seen some anecdotal evidence that those players fatigue much worse. And but also I've noticed in in various versions of the game, especially if you're playing like one format exclusively, like when I first started playing PT21, I only played gold, and there would just occasionally be a player where you're looking at like this guy is just always getting fatigued more quickly than all of my other players. And sometimes it was a guy who, it was their age 39 season, so it made sense. But there definitely just seemed to be certain players in the game that we didn't have a rating for it to kind of know. But if you looked at the data, you would just see that that player just consistently played less games based on, over a long period, over a large sample size of stats. You just see that certain guys just were always needing it. They were needing that rest day, more often over a big sample size. So I don't think that those guys that just randomly have some sort of internal fatigue rating that that they play less. There's not much you can adjust for that. It probably takes too much effort to really study it to figure out who those guys are. But if you do see a card that has a mistake on it, one, obviously let them know so that they can get that fixed if it's clearly not the right year for the card. But also be mindful of that. It may be a factor, but I think those are the kind of things where it's a weird thing at the margins, and people maybe spend too much time freaking out about that when I don't know that it would change that much.
Yeah, it's just like as you try, like you said, try to nibble at the edges. It's maybe something to consider, but you're looking at bumping like something that might happen 30% of the time to like 30.5, and even then that might be things are like the ranges of outcomes are fairly narrow, I'd kind of say. Like
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just good to remember, and someone much smarter than me explained it to me this way, that it's highly situational situations, and then you're just barely tweaking the frequency of behavior in those highly situational situations.
yeah.
So I definitely think it gets the criticality of them gets overstated.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got everything else kind of down, then you can sort of dig deeper and find these small ways to just squeeze every last ounce out of it. And when you're trying to compete against the best players in a given format, that's kind of what you have to do to maximize. But to get over the hump of just beating the average player, like you probably don't need to dig that deep. You're probably taking time away from other things that are going to give you better return on your time in terms of making improvements to your rosters and and increasing your likelihood of success.
Yeah. No, like I think Future Legend Ford, the gold Future Legend Ford, is one of the coolest cards of the cycle. At the same time, I also kind of think of him as a trap card for players that don't know better. Just because he has so much roster eligibility and he's really freaking good at all those positions.
Right.
And but when you really try and look at that card versus, what are some of the other meta options and such, you really want to try and hone in on the context of the card the card you actually own and where you're going to get the most value from him.
Right.
And so I've actually been running him in right field. And he's backing up second and third base. And so, which is actually usually outside of my comfort zone. I don't usually have a starter back as the primary backup, but my rod, and this is on my, I'm starting to tinker around with gold on an alt account, but I have Roger Bresnahan as backup catcher and second backup to third, And so like I'm comfortable with that with aggressive fatigue management, the settings. But he could be a trap card for a lot of players that don't understand the way roster construction fatigue works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because the benefit of a card like that is you can then it allows you to place other cards that might be hard to fit into uh, a roster, um, because he just gives you options. And and then really where he has a great advantage is if it's a tournament format where you're able to micro, then you can really move him around, and and take advantage that way. But I think in trying to set a roster that is just going to play out the games, you want to find as you build a roster, you want to kind of build so that he only has responsible for certain positions. It's just that I think you could use him in any number of ways based on who else you wanted to get into your lineup. It just it makes some of the cards that maybe only play one position, and only play one way. He can kind of fit in and kind of fit into different spots and open things up more. And also because there's there's a lot of other cards in gold right now that also sort of have some of those flexibilities. And so you can kind of mix and match, and you can try some different things, and definitely gives a lot of flexibility based on kind of how you like constructing a team. But you also have to avoid the pitfall of trying to take advantage of just the so many positions that he can legitimately play, because usually most cards have like two, maybe three legitimate options, and then anything more than that, it's a mistake to play them there. But he really theoretically could play almost anywhere.
Yeah.
So we want to move on to pitchers.
Pitchers.
Okay, so again, if the default's 14 hitters, then the default's going to be 12 pitchers. 5 starters and 7 relievers is pretty much the standard in an open format. You will see some people that go with 4 starters in an open format. The pitcher fatigue has kind of been a mess this year, and so I've seen teams sometimes have success with 4 starters that they don't really get that big of a penalty, even though there's supposed to be some sort of penalty built into for that. And so on an anecdotal basis, you'll see some teams be like, and you'll be annoyed like, oh, that shouldn't work, but it does. I think over time, I've very rarely seen teams that do that consistently have consistent success. And so I generally avoid it in open tournaments. But if you want to play with it, more power to you.
You're more likely to be successful by not having a 5th starter in your rotation, but have 5, like having only 4 out of 5 starters in your rotation. Because I think
like having 4 starters and then having somebody as an emergency.
No, not even that. Just letting the game engine figure out who to pitch on that game 5.
Oh, okay.
Like,
I mean, the danger is that if unless you have all starters as your 8 relievers, the odds that somebody's going to be at 100% to pitch that 5th game is pretty low. If especially if it's a fairly high run environment, which most formats are reasonably high. I just think that you're taking a risk that 5th starter is going to come in and be really exhausted, and especially if you happen to spike a 13 inning game the game before, if you don't have somebody in that 5th pitcher spot who is being held out of the bullpen, You're really just kind of taking an unnecessary risk
Oh yeah,
for
it's totally rolling
I
the
just think
dice.
a not great reward.
No,
Um,
Yeah.
and
because you
um,
still need 12 pitchers.
right.
Yeah.
Um,
To that point, Aster, the way I think about it from years of poker and other competitive card games is like oftentimes success is a matter of minimizing variance.
Right.
And so that's how I often think about PT is how can I build my roster or sliders even, even though there's it's really kind of fringe effort, but it's what is everything I have in my disposable to try and minimize variance so that I can consistently go as far as possible in a tournament.
and also, a lot of what you're doing in tournaments is, basically trying to. It's not so much trying to win as not creating situations where you're definitely going to lose. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of things that people get tricky with their rosters and try and be fancy, and they just create situations where if you have one bit of bad luck, now you're just definitely going to lose.
Yeah.
And um, and that's one of the biggest things because especially if you're playing like weeklies, a lot has to go right, and you need RNG to in your favor to make a deep run in a tournament, but you also need to let that RNG happen. If you create a pitching setup where one 13 inning game just means that you have no chance, then over the course of a long tournament like that, you're probably going to have one of those games. So you need to, uh, you sometimes just need to play not to lose, as Kinney puts it. And especially if you're just going to, build a roster, enter in the tournament, and then go check, afterwards to see how you did. If you're not doing any microwing, you have to, set it up where, you're going to be able to, the AI is going to be able to make adjustments, and people are kind of going to be in the right spots.
Yeah.
And I think if you're setting things up in unconventional ways, often you're putting yourself in a situation where you're just going to force yourself to lose for no good reason. So the next thing for pitchers to think about is, the handedness of your pitchers. Durden was talking about, at various points having like an all right-handed starting rotation and all right-handed bullpen. That's going to be a fringe, situation. That's not generally going to be what you want to do. A lot of this will be based on what the card pool looks like for your particular tournament format. I generally, if it at all makes sense, will lean towards having all of my starters be of one hand and then my bullpen pretty much being all the opposite hand. One of the reasons for that is if I have, let's say, 5 left-handed starters, then in the series, my opponent is always going to be running their VL lineup. And so when fatigue sets in and they have to bring in backups, it's going to be the wrong side of the platoon coming in as the backup. Whereas if you have, let's say, 3 lefties and 2 righties, then those platoon positions are going to be alternating, and the starters are just never going to get fatigued. They're always going to have that platoon advantage. So you're giving that up to your opponent by having your starters alternate. But if you go all one side, it forces it forces always to be using the same lineup, and you start getting an advantage in the later games in the series.
And before the strategy change, when they were sitting, uh, and you switched to the opposite handedness when the reliever came in, they would come off the bench and lose their rest basically. So that's why pretty much everyone asked for that default allow as pinch hit when tired setting to be globally set so that you can unset it instead of setting it, because that was a big thing at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
In I think for 23, we did, and this kind of goes into the bullpen roles, was to try to have a more balanced bullpen. But you think you've kind of changed your tune on that now? You think just like
So again, it largely depends. I mean, if I'm going, let's say, all lefty starters because that's the meta, then I'm probably not going to go all righties in my bullpen, but I might go like 5-2, and but I definitely want to have the majority, be the opposite hand, but and part of it is also, if the meta just doesn't fit, like if there's only 4 good lefties and there's like a clear, really good righty as like the best option, then, I will do that. I'll often then set up, if, in an open format, I'll set up an opener for that one starter. And, so that I at least still have, always face, unless they, have opener lineup set up, then I'm always facing like, let's say if I have 4 lefties and 1 righty, if I have a lefty opening for the righty, then I'm always getting the VL lineup. So I still get that advantage, but I still get to play the righty starter the majority of the innings, as if he was the starter, but just using him as a follower. So in that case, then I might balance my bullpen a little bit more if I'm doing something like that. But also, it's a lot of it is, you don't want to go too extreme if by going extreme you're foregoing the best cards to just kind of fit the mold. So if let's say you have 5 lefty starters and there really are only 5 good right-handed relievers, don't force the issue and play the 20th best relief pitcher just because he happens to be another righty. At that point, start looking at lefties if there's really good lefties that to go in the bullpen. So you've got to kind of balance it to what the player pool looks like, and I think you get in trouble if you are just kind of dogmatically saying, okay, I always go 5 of one side and then 7 in the bullpen the opposite way. You really have to adjust it to what the player pool, who are the guys that are going to work best for you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just kind of to call something of an audible, where it's 8:40, we have 20 minutes left. Do we want to go into the next slide, or do we want to just maybe answer a few questions and then leave that for another stream? What do you think? So I think that's kind of I feel like we can go a deep dive on just that next issue.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah,
just
I think it's okay to pull it up and maybe we can just do a really quick, just in case anyone's tuning in or anyone's going to come back and watch later, around like what card should I use?
right.
To Aster's point, like this is a whole episode unto itself. And just during the countdown, we were talking about maybe revisiting, how to collect, analyze data as a stream and things like that. But just to let everyone know, again, to kind of try to make PT more accessible, for maybe a new player watching this or someone new to the community, is most players will never get to number 4 and 5. And that's okay for 95 to 97% of people that are gonna, consistently play tournaments. That's fine. If you never get into modeling and trying to zig, figure out zigs when other people are zagging, and simply just trying to pick a format, play that format consistently, look for the teams that are consistently winning that format, and try to understand why they're choosing the cards they're choosing. Look for cards that are appearing consistently in some of the top teams' rosters. And so you'll often hear people use the word shape, and really it's learning how to eyeball why good cards are good cards. Yasmani Grandal, great catcher ability, super high. I think the highest eye for all gold catchers, even higher than Ray Schalk. And so, but he's got a well balanced card outside of that, and he's a switch hitter, right? So like learning that shape is a good PT24 shape, with high eye, decent pop to the bat, and his BABIP is okay. So, but anyway, just starting to just pick a format. If you're new to this, pick a format and just watch that. I mean, keep an eye, enter the format, because you can only look at a tournament's data if you enter it. Enter that format consistently and start looking for, what winning teams are doing. So anyway, but to Aster's point, we can at least preview that and talk about that. And at least, this may be the first time we say it across many, many streams, but it's okay if you never get to number 4 and 5. Actually, most people never, ever, ever will get to number 4 and number 5, and that's okay.
To answer Kava's question, this is what, when we talk about shape, usually it's the relationship of the individual ratings. So that it's fixed, right? Like BABIP is before power, is before EVK, is before contact, is before gap, before eye. So having played, hundreds of thousands, no, not hundreds of thousands, but like playing hundreds of hours of this game, the ability, like I suck at it, but the ability to kind of just like see a card, see the overall, and be like, oh, this is a good card, or this is a bad card, or I think this is a good card. And like the shading, there's complaints about the shading, and it's like hard to differentiate, and you have to kind of look at the numbers, then you have to like hold a bunch of numbers. But in general, it's like, oh, the eye is very blue. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Power is good versus L. Cool. And it's like,
yeah. Well, and that shape translates across formats, right? And if we overlook the coloring for a moment, but so for example, in Iron, in a lot of Iron tournaments, I should say, like I even run him in the Monday Bronze Cap. Bobby Del Greco, I'm pretty sure that's it. Is he has this shape, but in Iron, like he's not going to have all that green and blue, but he has that shape, and he plays up into the Bronze Cap great, and you get some points, for him. You get to save some points and invest them somewhere else in your cap. And so it's that shape of card where you have the high eye, and he's not going to kill you in the other hitting categories.
Yeah, I'm just pulling him up now. So
yeah.
This is Del Greco.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like, you don't have the power, but the eye is there.
And yeah, I mean, you're talking about like believe like a 34 point discrepancy between those two, but you learn to just start eyeballing those cards and seeing a shape, and then of course the next level would be, how does that shape?
Yeah, going back to,
well, and so a lot of it is that, I think this cycle and, last cycle, especially at the very beginning of the year, power and I seem to be, kind of for most, especially open formats, modern era, that, that really kind of controls a lot of the value of the card. After that, other factors can matter, and it will depend a lot on, who the starting pitchers make up the meta in that format as to what else, matters. But, BABIP definitely, I think, is generally important. Gap is kind of an underrated factor. And then, in tournaments, I wouldn't ignore AVK, but it's probably one of the lesser, formats. So, just in terms of like, thinking about this as a progression, you know, if you're starting out playing tournaments and you have no idea, what shapes work or how to, collect data or how to build a model or any of that, the first thing that I think people generally, give as advice is enter a tournament, just throw something together, and then look at who wins, and who else, finishes deep. See which cards show up on a lot of rosters, and that's a good way to to start. And then the important thing is that's not the end of the equation. I think a lot of times that's the advice we give people, but that's step one, and obviously, you can do fairly well doing that. You'll get better at it if you do it a lot of entering tournaments and seeing what wins and trying to copy that. The important thing is don't just copy the cards. You have to understand kind of how they fit together with the rest of the cards. And then as you start to play more and look at rosters more, you're going to be able to start getting a sense of, okay, these top players are playing these cards because they're the shape that fit, because they have the ratings that produce results. And then as you get deeper into it, I think you can, if you want to, there are definitely resources out there for learning how to collect data. DRC did a phenomenal stream a couple years ago where he broke down like how to set up an Excel spreadsheet, how to download the data and compile it. And you can definitely go down a rabbit hole with that. But the important thing to remember is that takes a lot of time. I mean, even if you just pick one tournament format and you're just playing, let's say, bronze quicks, it's a lot of time and effort to build that spreadsheet and enter the data. They don't make it easy for you, but I do think there's a nice reward to it. That if you do take the time, I think you can learn more about what cards play, and there are some cards that even the best players will eyeball and think, oh, this just doesn't play. But then you look at the stats over a few hundred tournaments, you're like, wow, this guy actually is really effective. And it requires that seeing it from that perspective, more of like a bird's eye view of what's going on, to get that sense. So understand that if you put the time into it, you get a nice reward. It definitely helps you. But I think there's a lot of really good players that never collect data, don't analyze it, but have gotten very good at building rosters through number one and number two, without kind of expanding the time they spend on the game, to incorporate level 3 or 4, or 5.
Well, like 3 and 4 just help you understand 2 is what
Right.
I want to say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like
I mean,
I need 3 and 4 because I'm bad at 2. So that's why I do that.
God, like, sometimes to your point, X, I feel like Fabtron, right? That guy he may be the best eyeballer in the community. And he'll just throw some gnarly predictions out there. Then a week or two later, we've all collected data and we're like, holy crap, he was right, you know? But yeah, to your point, especially for someone newer to the community, and especially in run environments, nowadays it's not just knowing what shapes play; it's also factoring in, ballpark and then also run environments. So
Has anyone actually validated that the ballparks do what they say? Like I've collected a ton of data, but I've never gone and like said like this card pool playing in a neutral park and this card pool with data in a park, and then like adjust the data. Oh, it seemed close. Okay, yeah. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at it for like, after some of the PTCS, and without, that's obviously not enough data to really dig into it, but it does look like what I thought the best card should be based on how the ballpark was going to affect things seemed to match up with what cards actually played the best. We had a couple of ballparks that were just very heavily lefty power versus righty power, and you could just see all the home runs were hit by the left-handed power hitters, and the right-handed power hitters just underperformed consistently across a number of different players. So even if you didn't have a ton of stats on any given player because it was just one tournament, it showed up in just the handedness.
Distribution.
It did clearly influence things. I don't know if it was exactly based on what we would have projected based on the part factors, but it definitely it leaned the right way. Which with OHTP, prior to PT23, the farther you went back in time, the more home runs you got. So the fact that they're able to like do things that at least lean in the right direction, is nice to see.
Okay. Well, the replay is now live, so we will call it a night for tonight. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, so I guess going back to what Aster and Durden were saying at the beginning, anything that we kind of covered today, let us know. And if I'm not around, Durden would be around, and if Durden's not around, then Aster's DMs are always open. Just volunteer.
I would definitely encourage people, like if you have a topic you want us to dig into, you can also just ping us in the PT Discord. Feel free to post them in the tournament channel and ping us with some ideas, and we're very flexible with angles we can take. So
yeah, and if you asked a question in chat and we didn't answer it, feel free to send it as a DM. We had a lot we wanted to try and get to, and there were a lot of good questions. So I don't think we answered all of them, but we're happy to take the time, whenever we get the chance. So have a good night, everybody, and go play some tournaments.
Yep.
See everyone.
Yeah. Have a good night. Thanks. Gonna raid over 3, 2, 1. Bye.